the preliminary report into the Air India plane crash, which tragically killed 260 people, has revealed crucial details. The investigation found that the fuel control switches of the Boeing 787 Dreamliner were moved to a cut-off position. This action occurred moments before the crash, which would typically turn off the engines entirely. Following the crash of Air India Flight 171, speculation surged across the internet. Theories ranged from flaps and engine failure to pilot suicide and cyber attacks. Some theories were based on real questions, while others were complete fabrications, including some generated by artificial intelligence. In this video, we will evaluate every major theory circulating, from mechanical faults to digital sabotage. We'll also explore human error and deeper issues inside Boeing itself. Then, we will examine the verified data, cockpit voice recordings, flight logs, and CCTV footage. We'll also review weather reports and official investigative findings, step by step. By the end, we'll piece together what the evidence reveals, uncovering the true reason Flight 171 went down. Our goal is to rely on facts, data, and the report itself, steering clear of online misinformation. First, let's evaluate the speculation that arose before the preliminary report was released. Early in the investigation, much focus was directed toward the aircraft's flaps. One popular theory suggested the crew may have failed to set the flaps for takeoff. This failure could have led to poor lift and climb performance during the flight. However, we now know for a fact that this did not happen. According to the preliminary report, the flaps were set correctly for takeoff. On the Boeing 787, this is a difficult error to make, as multiple checklists require flap confirmation. Additionally, the aircraft monitors flap position and issues a warning if not set correctly. In this instance, flaps 5 were used, which is a standard takeoff setting. It's important to note that flaps 5 produce only a small visual deflection, especially on the carbon fiber wing. From the video alone, it would have been difficult to confirm the flap position. The next wave of theories concentrated on the engines of the aircraft. This gained traction after a high-resolution video surfaced, revealing a distinct buzzing noise. This sound suggested the aircraft's ram air turbine, or RAT, had deployed. The RAT automatically deploys when the aircraft loses electrical power, indicating a major system failure. The preliminary report later confirmed that the RAT indeed deployed during the initial climb. This led investigators to shift their focus towards a potential engine-related failure. However, the report stated there was no significant bird activity near the aircraft. Moreover, no other environmental factors compromised the engines. Failure due to pure technical faults is almost unheard of in aviation. Even scenarios like fuel contamination rarely result in both engines shutting down simultaneously. In almost every case of a sequential failure, there would be noticeable yaw. This turning motion occurs due to isometrical thrust as one engine fails while the other continues to push. Interestingly, that kind of yaw was not seen clearly in any of the CCTV or public video footage. But here's where the Boeing 787 systems complicate things. It's a fly-by-wire aircraft, and its autopilot architecture can automatically correct yaw with rudder inputs. This includes moving the rudder pedals in front of the pilots. So if the engines failed within seconds of each other, but not truly simultaneously, it's possible that the aircraft compensated in real time, masking the asymmetry from outside view. The automation is a double-edged sword. It makes the 787 sophisticated but can also hide early signs of trouble. Another area of interest is the landing gear. According to the preliminary report, the landing gear lever remained in the down and lock position. That in itself is not unusual. Gear retraction normally occurs several seconds into the climb. But the video footage introduced a puzzling detail. In at least one frame, the main gear bogies appear to be rotated. This rotation typically occurs only during gear retraction. On the 787, each main gear leg has a pair of wheels front and back. For the gear to retract smoothly into the fuselage, the bogie must tilt, lowering the forward wheels. However, in the footage, this rotation appears to have occurred without the gear doors opening. or whether this was an illusion caused by video resolution and angles. It's important to emphasize that the 787 has highly automated hydraulic and electrical systems. These systems can occasionally initiate component responses without direct pilot input. For example, if the systems detect weight off wheels and no conflicting logic inputs, it may automatically sequence actuators, even if the gear lever wasn't moved. But so far, the interim reports make no mention of gear retraction. And without that data, the boogie angle anomaly remains unexplained. What's becoming increasingly clear, though, is that none of these early theories explain the full picture. The aircraft was rotating normally, the engines were producing thrust during the initial climb. Yet, within seconds, it lost power from both engines, deployed the RAT, and never regained altitude. No external signs of engine failure, no configuration error, and no time to recover. This leads to the speculated theories after the preliminary report. First in the line of these theories is the deferred FAA advisory on fuel switch locking. These switches are normally set to run before takeoff, and remain. Throughout the flight, the fuel control switches remain in position. They are only moved to cutoff after landing, once the aircraft is at the gate. To clarify, those fuel control switches should never be touched during flight. They are activated before departure and turned off only after the aircraft is safely parked. However, what complicates this situation further is the design of the 787's fuel switches. These switches are not casual toggles, they are physical levers requiring a lift and pull action. This design aims to prevent accidental contact and ensure safety during flight. As Captain Steve, a senior airline pilot and aviation analyst, explains, there has never been a case where both switches went to cutoff by themselves. To switch them from run to cutoff, a pilot must take 3 deliberate actions. These actions include lifting over the detent and pulling downwards. While the preliminary report noted some deferred maintenance items, it stated that none of them directly impacted the safety of the flight. However, one detail in the report has drawn significant attention. This detail refers to a special airworthiness information bulletin issued by the FAA. This bulletin was released in December 2018, warning about potential disengagement. It specifically addressed the locking feature on fuel control switches. These are the same switches that, when moved to cutoff mid-flight, shut down both engines. This advisory originated from reports involving the Boeing 737, where some aircraft had issues. These switches include built-in safeguards requiring pilots to lift before moving them. This design ensures that they cannot be bumped or toggled accidentally. However, the advisory raised concerns that the safety barrier might not always be active. The FAA recommended that all Boeing operators inspect their switches across aircraft types. Boeing itself never issued a mandatory service bulletin for the 787 fleet. Nor did they resign or replace the switches, despite the similar hardware. As a result, Air India was never required to inspect their 787s for this issue. While no public record exists of fuel switch control failures in other 787s in the past 7 years. In fact, the lack of reported incidents may indicate a systematic blind spot. If this design flaw was rare but possible, and Boeing was aware as early as 2018, the responsibility fell on them to ensure proper safeguards were in place, especially for a function as critical as in-flight engine shutdown. In other words, Boeing designed a system that allowed both engine cutoff switches to be moved mid-flight. There was no secondary override, no two-step confirmation, and no cockpit alert. Whether the switches were moved intentionally or by accident remains a critical question. The system allowed the incident to unfold without resistance. This raises a core question. In a modern jetliner, engineered to prevent catastrophic human error, how could it happen? How could 2 small switches, just inches away from the pilot, lead to a 250-ton aircraft crash in under 30 seconds? According to media reports, India's air crash investigators released a preliminary report on last month's tragic Air India crash. This incident claimed the lives of 260 people, raising unsettling implications about the pilot's mental state. One pilot may have been emotionally distressed due to a recent divorce, suggesting a potential deliberate act. But is this claim factual or merely a dangerous attempt to shift blame from Boeing to a deceased pilot? Reports allege that Captain Sumit Subharwal may have intentionally crashed the aircraft. This act, allegedly driven by emotional distress, raises further questions about pilot safety. The rumor gained traction after aviation analyst Captain Mohan Raunathan appeared on NDTV. He cited the cockpit voice recorder, suggesting one fuel switch was manually turned off. The theory of pilot suicide isn't new, but past cases were distinctly different. In 2013, the captain of LAM Mozambique Airlines Flight 470 locked the co-pilot out of the cockpit. The final report confirmed this was a deliberate act, adding to the horror of the event. Again, in 2015, Germanwings Flight 9525 was crashed into the French Alps by a co-pilot. Andreas Lubitz, the co-pilot, had a documented history of depression. He locked the captain out of the cockpit before initiating a controlled descent. This tragic decision led to the loss of 150 lives, heightening concerns about pilot mental health. The idea of pilot sabotage raises alarms, particularly because past cases had strong supporting evidence. These included suicidal notes, mental health records, and cockpit audio showing one pilot locking the other out. In the case of Air India 171, however, there's no such evidence available. No known psychological evaluations point to instability, no medical red flags exist. Most importantly, the cockpit voice recorder doesn't confirm any suicidal intentions. These tests confirm they were fit to operate the flight over Gatwick. Moreover, both pilots appeared to have gotten adequate rest prior to the flight, according to reports. Experts stress that pilots undergo rigorous training for engine failure scenarios. These drills are repeated constantly in simulations to ensure pilots respond effectively under pressure. Under no circumstances is a pilot trained to activate a fuel control switch before reaching the designated engine out failure, which is typically at 1,000 feet above ground level. Moreover, India's pilot associations and global pilot unions have forcefully condemned the suicide theory. They called it reckless, premature, and a dangerous precedent that blames the very people trying to prevent disasters. So, with that in mind, could remote interferences have caused the fuel shutdown? Some speculate that a cyber attack or remote interference might have triggered the fuel cutoff on the AI-171. It's true the Boeing 787 is fly-by-wire, and all its commands, including the fuel control, pass through digital systems. This is why concerns about vulnerabilities exist, especially in 2015. The U.S. Government Accountability Office did issue a warning about the onboard networks, including satellite data links. These networks could be vulnerable under specific circumstances. In the same year, a researcher publicly claimed he accessed in-flight systems via the entertainment network. Though those claims were never verified, and Boeing strongly denied any system breach. No breach or system anomaly was reported in the preliminary findings. The fuel cutoff switches are mechanical, and both physically moved, engine 1, then engine 2, within 1 second. A cyber intrusion would more likely affect software logic, not trigger physical switch movement inside the cockpit. So, while the digital threats are real and growing in relevance, there's no indication that remote interference played a role here. The cause most likely originated from within the aircraft, not outside it. The first thing people point towards is the possibility of carrying something dangerous. One of the speculations we heard before the preliminary report was released was the fact that the aircraft might have been carrying something that could affect the instruments on board. But the load manifest showed that there were no dangerous goods on board the flight. Anyway, the pilot's fuel calculations, the rest of the load sheet, as well as the Wi-Fi speed calculations didn't raise any flags for the investigators either. Everything was apparently within allowable limits. The second thing people point towards is that there was a possibility of an environmental or fuel-related failure. On the day of the crash, the weather was clear skies with 6,000 meters of visibility, and the temperature was 37 degrees Celsius, or about 99 degrees Fahrenheit. Especially because there were reports that the pilots needed the entire runway for takeoff. Unfortunately, the preliminary report didn't provide the exact takeoff distance, but the takeoff was normal. And this photo taken from a CCTV camera shows that the aircraft was airborne before the end of the runway, so hopefully that clears up. But weather speculations didn't stop there. An electrical fault triggered by moisture intrusion into the engine electronics caused the incident. Rumors suggest a leak occurred during pushback due to torrential rainfall, leading to engine rollback. This theory was detailed, compelling, and entirely false. How do we know? It was based on a leaked insider report that was AI-generated. Several YouTubers and Twitter personalities referenced the document, claiming insider access. However, aviation analysts revealed that the report had been fabricated using generative AI tools. Official weather logs confirmed no rainfall in Ahmedabad for at least 48 hours before the flight. The airport tarmac was dry, and pushback occurred in normal conditions. This brings us to the next point, blaming Boeing. Investigators must closely examine Boeing for possible mechanical failure or a software bug. If both pilots believed the switches were correctly positioned, did something inside the aircraft send the wrong signal? This is where things become serious. The fuel control switches are manually operated and physically protected against accidental activation. However, they don't operate in isolation. They're linked to the 787's electronic engine control system. This system translates physical inputs into software commands. If that chain breaks, if data is corrupted, or if a software bug misinterprets a run as a cutoff, the results could mimic what happened on Flight 171. Boeing has faced similar failures before. The 737 MAX case exposed how cost-cutting and poor documentation led to devastating consequences. That culture of outsourcing under-resourced software teams and a hands-off FAA persists. Many of those practices continued into the Dreamliner program. With Flight 171, those concerns are back in focus. If a software process misinterprets the fuel switch position, it could cut power to both engines during takeoff. The Dreamliner may not just have a pilot training issue, it might have a fundamental system design flaw. In recent years, there have been reports of production shortcuts and software inconsistencies. Wiring defects and a troubling tendency to keep issues quiet until forced to speak have emerged. In 2023, Boeing temporarily halted Dreamliner deliveries over concerns about incorrectly documented structural joints. In 2024, a whistleblower testified before Congress, alleging improperly fastened 787 fuselages. These allegations point to potential long-term fatigue issues. As investigations continue, the aviation community watches closely for answers. What will this mean for Boeing, the Dreamliner, and aviation safety as a whole? On the other side of the spectrum, another Boeing whistleblower, John Barnett, raised concerns over defective oxygen systems. He also pointed out faulty quality checks, but tragically, he was found dead in South Carolina from a gunshot wound. While this incident was ruled a suicide, the timing raised serious alarms. He was mid-deposition in a lawsuit against Boeing, a fact that intensified suspicions. These incidents are not isolated, they reflect a pattern of suppressed warnings and silenced engineers. So, is it possible that the pilot was blamed just to avoid paying insurance? Let's explain this further. The plane itself, the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, is insured for its value. This whole insurance typically ranges from 1,500 to 2,000 crore, about $200 to $250 million. Then there's passenger insurance, which goes to the families of those who died. But here's where things get tricky. Insurance companies and aircraft makers like Boeing have strict rules. If the crash occurred due to mechanical problems, software glitches, or design flaws, Boeing could be held responsible. This could lead to massive payouts in lawsuits, compensation, and damages, sometimes exceeding 5,000 crore. But if the crash was caused by the pilot, especially if ruled a deliberate act like suicide, everything changes. In such cases, insurance contracts often stipulate they won't pay full compensation. If a pilot crashes the plane on purpose, Boeing could evade blame entirely. The aircraft's insurance might not pay out at all, leaving families to fight long battles for justice. But the families, they lose more than just their loved ones. They may also lose the money they're legally owed and the chance to know what really happened. It's a quiet strategy: blame the person who can't defend themselves. And Boeing is no stranger to influence, especially with billions at stake. The company has deep ties to regulators, political institutions, and even investigative bodies. After the 737 MAX disasters, internal memos revealed how Boeing lobbied aggressively to minimize scrutiny. Engineers were silenced, whistleblowers ignored, and some, like John Barnett, never made it to testify. While the FAA and the NTSB are officially involved, many analysts quietly ask, who's really running the investigation? Is the data being selectively interpreted? Are findings being softened, delayed, or rewritten? When a multi-billion-dollar company like Boeing has resources and motivation to protect itself, facts can become negotiable. The truth might get buried under layers of influence, and at this point, all leads point toward Boeing. But the question remains, will the final report actually reveal the truth? Or will money and influence bury it, just like so many times before? Be sure to comment your thoughts down below. And for more honest, in-depth investigations like this one, don't forget to subscribe. Please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and stay updated.